Before we dive into one of the most incredible stories of transformation, perseverance, and ultimate vindication you'll ever hear, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. This story proves that the people who try to tear us down often become the stepping stones to our greatest success, and you won't want to miss how this unfolds. David Chen had always been different, and by the age of 12, he was acutely aware that the world saw his 4-foot 3-inch frame before it saw anything else about him. Growing up in the suburban town of Millfield, Massachusetts, David learned early that being a person with dwarfism meant navigating not just physical challenges, but the far more painful emotional landscape of other people's ignorance, cruelty, and assumptions about what he could and couldn't achieve. The bullying started in elementary school but reached its most vicious peak during his middle school years at Millfield Junior High. A group of older students, led by a particularly cruel boy named Trevor Morrison, had made David's daily life a nightmare of taunts, physical harassment, and systematic humiliation. Trevor was everything that American middle school culture celebrated. Tall, athletic, popular, and possessed of the kind of casual cruelty that teenagers could wield like a weapon. He came from one of Millfield's wealthiest families, his father owning Morrison Construction, the largest building company in the region, which gave Trevor an additional sense of entitlement and invincibility. "Look, it's just a dwarf," Trevor would announce whenever David entered a classroom or walked down the hallway, his voice carrying the particular blend of mockery and dismissal that cut deeper than any physical blow. The phrase, "just a dwarf," became Trevor's signature taunt, repeated so often by him and his followers that it seemed to echo through the school corridors even when they weren't around. Other students would pick up the phrase, some out of genuine cruelty, others simply because conformity felt safer than standing up to the school's established social hierarchy. But David was far from just anything. While his classmates were focused on sports, social status, and the typical preoccupations of adolescence, David had discovered something that would prove far more valuable in the long run: an extraordinary aptitude for mathematics, computer programming, and business strategy. His parents, both professors at nearby Williams College, had recognized their son's intellectual gifts early and nurtured them carefully, providing him with advanced textbooks, programming languages, and encouragement to explore subjects far beyond his grade level. In the sanctuary of his bedroom, surrounded by computer manuals and business magazines, David found refuge from the daily cruelties of school. While Trevor and his friends were playing video games or hanging out at the mall, David was teaching himself programming languages, studying the stock market, and reading biographies of successful entrepreneurs. He devoured books about business strategy, absorbed every article about emerging technologies, and spent hours analyzing what made some companies succeed while others failed. The contrast between David's inner world and his daily reality at school was stark and painful. In class, he consistently scored the highest grades in mathematics and science, often solving problems that stumped his teachers. His essays were sophisticated and well-reasoned, his project presentations were thorough and insightful, and his understanding of complex concepts impressed even the most demanding instructors. Yet none of this academic excellence seemed to matter to his peers, who saw only his physical appearance and used it as justification for their cruelty. David's parents, Dr. Sarah Chen and Dr. Michael Chen, were both accomplished academics who had immigrated from Taiwan in the 1980s to pursue advanced degrees in chemistry and economics respectively. They had faced their own challenges as immigrants building careers in American academia, and they understood the importance of resilience, education, and long-term thinking. They watched their son endure daily humiliation with a mixture of heartbreak and admiration, seeing in him a strength and determination that reminded them of their own struggles to establish themselves in a new country. "David," his mother would tell him during their evening conversations, "the people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who are most afraid of your potential. They see something in you that threatens them, even if they don't understand what it is yet." His father would add, "Success is the best revenge, but more importantly, success for its own sake, for the satisfaction of building something meaningful, is the greatest gift you can give yourself." These conversations became David's foundation, providing him with a framework for understanding that the cruelty he experienced was not a reflection of his worth, but rather a manifestation of other people's insecurities and limitations. He began to see Trevor's bullying not as evidence of his own inadequacy, but as proof that Trevor felt threatened by qualities he couldn't understand or possess: intelligence, determination, and the kind of quiet confidence that comes from knowing your own value regardless of external validation. The worst incident occurred during David's 8th grade year, when Trevor and his friends cornered him after school and subjected him to particularly vicious harassment, filming their taunts and threats with the intention of posting the video online. "You're just a dwarf," Trevor sneered into the camera. "And that's all you'll ever be. Nobody's ever going to take you seriously, nobody's ever going to respect you, and you'll never amount to anything." The video was posted on social media that evening, accompanied by cruel comments and mocking emojis that spread throughout their school community within hours. But instead of breaking David's spirit, this public humiliation crystallized something powerful within him. That night, as he sat in his room deleting the notifications from his phone and trying to process the cruelty he had endured, David made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. He opened a notebook and began writing down specific, measurable goals: graduate as valedictorian, earn a full scholarship to a top university, master multiple programming languages, start his own company before age 25, and build a business empire that would prove, once and for all, that success had nothing to do with physical appearance and everything to do with vision, intelligence, and determination. The goals were ambitious, almost to the point of seeming unrealistic. But David approached them with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else. He created detailed plans, established timelines, and began working toward each objective with an intensity that impressed even his academically minded parents. He studied business case studies late into the night, practiced programming until his fingers ached, and analyzed successful companies with the dedication of a monk studying sacred texts. David's transformation during his high school years was remarkable to witness. While maintaining his academic excellence, he also developed an entrepreneurial mindset that set him apart from his peers. He started small businesses during summers, launched a tutoring service for younger students, and even created simple software applications that he sold online. Each venture taught him valuable lessons about customer service, marketing, financial management, and the psychology of business relationships. More importantly, David was developing something that no amount of bullying could touch: an unshakable belief in his own capabilities and a clear vision of the future he intended to create. Trevor Morrison and his friends continued their harassment throughout high school, but their words carried less weight with each passing year as David's accomplishments mounted and his confidence grew. The boy who had once cowered in school hallways was becoming a young man with the knowledge, skills, and determination to build something extraordinary. What Trevor and his followers didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly have predicted, was that their victim was quietly developing into exactly the kind of person who would someday have the power to change their lives in ways they never imagined. The phrase, "just a dwarf," that had been intended to diminish and discourage was instead becoming fuel for an ambition that would ultimately prove far more powerful than their cruelty. As David prepared for his final year of high school, already accepted to MIT with a full scholarship and several small business successes under his belt, he looked back on the years of bullying with something approaching gratitude. Not because the experience had been positive, but because it had forced him to develop inner resources and external capabilities that he might never have discovered otherwise. The boy who had been told he would never amount to anything was about to embark on a journey that would prove just how wrong his tormentors had been. David's transformation from a bullied middle school student to a determined young entrepreneur began in earnest during his high school years, when he channeled his pain and anger into an almost superhuman focus on academic and business achievement. While Trevor Morrison and his crew continued their harassment, their taunts began to sound increasingly hollow as David's accomplishments mounted and his confidence grew with each passing semester. The summer before his senior year marked a turning point that would prove crucial to everything that followed. While most of his classmates took traditional summer jobs at local restaurants or retail stores, David launched his first serious business venture, a web development company he called Chen Tech Solutions. Operating from his parents' basement, David offered website design and basic programming services to local small businesses who were beginning to understand the importance of having an online presence but lacked the technical knowledge to create one themselves. What started as a modest summer project quickly evolved into something much more significant. David's combination of technical skill, business acumen, and genuine customer service set him apart from the few other web developers in the area. He didn't just build websites, he listened carefully to each client's needs, offered strategic advice about online marketing, and provided ongoing support that turned one-time customers into loyal advocates who referred their friends and colleagues. By the end of that summer, Chen Tech Solutions had generated over $15,000 in revenue, employed 2 other high school students as part-time assistants, and established relationships with more than 30 local businesses. David had learned invaluable lessons about client management, project delivery, financial planning, and the kind of systematic approach to business growth that would serve him well in the years to come. More importantly, David was discovering that his size, which had been such a source of pain and limitation in the social environment of school, was completely irrelevant in the business world. When clients communicated with him via email or phone, when they saw the quality of his work and experienced his professionalism, his physical appearance simply didn't matter. Success in business, David realized, was about delivering value, solving problems, and building relationships based on trust and competence rather than superficial characteristics. The contrast between his business success and his continued experiences with bullying at school was striking. Trevor Morrison, who would graduate with mediocre grades and no clear direction for his future, continued to mock David's appearance and academic achievements, apparently oblivious to the fact that his victim was quietly building the foundation for a business empire. During lunch periods, while Trevor and his friends discussed weekend parties and complained about their part-time jobs, David would often be found reviewing business proposals, corresponding with clients, or studying advanced computer science textbooks that most college students wouldn't encounter until their junior year. David's academic performance during his senior year was nothing short of extraordinary. He graduated as valedictorian with a perfect 4.0 GPA, scored in the 99th percentile on both the SAT and ACT, and earned recognition in multiple academic competitions including the State Mathematics Olympiad and a National Computer Science Fair. His valedictorian speech, delivered to a packed auditorium that included Trevor Morrison and his family, was a masterclass in grace under pressure and subtle triumph. Success, David told the assembled graduates and their families, is not about the circumstances you start with, but about the choices you make in response to those circumstances. It's not about what others say you can't do, but about what you prove you can accomplish through dedication, intelligence, and perseverance. Today we celebrate not just our graduation, but our potential to create positive change in the world, regardless of what obstacles we may have faced along the way. The speech was met with thunderous applause, and David noticed with satisfaction that Trevor Morrison and his friends seemed notably uncomfortable during the standing ovation that followed. For perhaps the first time, the social dynamics that had defined their school experience were reversed, with David commanding respect and admiration while his former tormentors sat in the audience, realizing that the person they had dismissed as just a dwarf had achieved more in 4 years of high school than they had ever imagined possible. David's acceptance to MIT came with not just a full academic scholarship, but additional recognition as one of the university's most promising incoming students. The computer science department had taken particular notice of his entrepreneurial activities and his advanced understanding of programming concepts, offering him the opportunity to work with graduate-level research teams from his freshman year. The transition from small-town Massachusetts to the intellectually demanding environment of MIT represented everything David had been working toward since those painful middle school years. At MIT, David encountered a completely different social environment than he had experienced in Millfield. The university's culture of intellectual achievement and innovation meant that students were valued for their ideas, their technical abilities, and their potential contributions to advancing human knowledge. David's size was occasionally noted, but it was treated as a simple fact rather than a source of judgment or mockery. His dormitory roommates and classmates were far more interested in his programming skills, his business experience, and his insights into emerging technologies than in his physical appearance. This environment allowed David to flourish in ways that would have been impossible in his hometown. He threw himself into his studies with characteristic intensity, but he also expanded his social circle, joined entrepreneurship clubs, and began developing the network of relationships that would prove crucial to his future business success. For the first time in his life, David was surrounded by people who saw his potential rather than his limitations, who challenged him intellectually rather than attacking him personally. During his sophomore year at MIT, David made a decision that would accelerate his path toward the success he had envisioned during those dark days of middle school bullying. Instead of simply focusing on his computer science degree, he began taking business courses at MIT's Sloan School of Management, developing a deeper understanding of corporate finance, strategic planning, and organizational management. He also expanded Chen Tech Solutions, which he had continued operating remotely while at college, into a more sophisticated consulting firm that specialized in helping traditional businesses adapt to the digital economy. The growth of his business during his college years was remarkable. By his junior year, Chen Tech Solutions employed 12 full-time programmers and business analysts, had offices in Boston and Springfield, and was generating over $200,000 in annual revenue. David had learned to delegate effectively, manage remote teams, and scale operations while maintaining the quality and customer service standards that had made his initial success possible. More significantly, David was developing the kind of industry knowledge and professional network that would enable him to identify and capitalize on much larger opportunities. Through his work with various clients, his relationships with MIT faculty members, and his involvement in Boston's emerging technology scene, David began to understand how entire industries could be disrupted by innovative applications of technology and strategic thinking. During his senior year, as David prepared for graduation and contemplated his next steps, he received news that brought a mixture of satisfaction and contemplation. Trevor Morrison, who had struggled through community college and worked intermittently for his father's construction company, had been arrested for drunk driving and assault charges stemming from a bar fight. Morrison Construction, meanwhile, was experiencing significant financial difficulties due to poor management, outdated business practices, and Trevor's father's health problems. David felt no pleasure in learning about Trevor's troubles, but he couldn't help reflecting on how dramatically their paths had diverged since those painful days when Trevor had proclaimed that David would never amount to anything. While Trevor had coasted on his family's reputation and social advantages, ultimately squandering the opportunities that had been handed to him, David had transformed adversity into motivation, using every setback as fuel for greater achievement. As David walked across the stage at MIT's commencement ceremony, receiving his degree in computer science with highest honors and recognition as one of the university's most accomplished graduates, he thought about the journey that had brought him to this moment. The scared, humiliated 12-year-old who had been told he was just a dwarf had become a successful entrepreneur, a respected member of the technology community, and a young man with the knowledge, skills, and resources to pursue even greater ambitions. But David's story was far from over. Armed with his MIT degree, his growing business, and an unshakable confidence in his abilities, he was ready to take on challenges that would make his college achievements seem like merely the foundation for something much more significant. The boy who had been bullied for being different was about to prove that being different could be the greatest advantage of all. Fresh out of MIT with his computer science degree and a growing business already under his belt, David Chen stood at a crossroads that would define the next phase of his extraordinary journey. While many of his classmates were interviewing for entry-level positions at established technology companies, David had set his sights on something far more ambitious: building a technology empire that would revolutionize how businesses operated in the digital age. The year was 2008. And the economic recession that was devastating traditional industries presented David with exactly the kind of opportunity that separated visionary entrepreneurs from ordinary business people. While established companies were cutting costs and scaling back their operations, David recognized that the economic downturn would accelerate the digital transformation that he had been predicting since his college years. Businesses that had been reluctant to invest in new technologies were suddenly desperate for innovative solutions that could help them survive and thrive in a rapidly changing marketplace. David made a bold decision that would have seemed reckless to outside observers but was actually based on careful analysis and strategic planning. Instead of playing it safe with his growing consulting business, he decided to leverage everything he had built to launch something much more ambitious: a software development company that would create comprehensive business management platforms for mid-sized companies across multiple industries. The company he founded, Nexus Systems, represented the culmination of everything David had learned about technology, business strategy, and customer needs during his years of running Chen Tech Solutions. But Nexus was designed to be something entirely different in scope and ambition. Rather than simply building websites or providing basic programming services, Nexus would create integrated software solutions that could transform how companies managed their operations, tracked their finances, communicated with customers, and planned for growth. David's approach to building Nexus demonstrated the sophisticated understanding of business strategy that had been developing since his high school years. Instead of trying to compete directly with established software giants like Microsoft or Oracle, he identified a specific market niche that was being underserved: Mid-sized companies that were too large for simple off-the-shelf solutions but too small to afford custom enterprise software that cost millions of dollars to implement. The timing of Nexus's launch proved to be perfect. As the recession deepened and companies struggled to maintain profitability, David's software solutions offered exactly what they needed: comprehensive business management tools that could increase efficiency, reduce costs, and provide the kind of detailed analytics that helped companies make smarter decisions about resource allocation and strategic planning. The fact that Nexus's solutions cost a fraction of what traditional enterprise software vendors charged made them even more attractive to companies trying to do more with less. David's first major client was a regional manufacturing company that was on the verge of bankruptcy due to inefficient operations and poor financial management. The comprehensive software solution that Nexus developed for them didn't just solve their immediate problems. It transformed their entire approach to business operations. Within 6 months of implementing David's system, the company had reduced operating costs by 30%, improved customer satisfaction scores significantly, and returned to profitability for the first time in 3 years. This success story became a powerful case study that David used to attract additional clients, and word of Nexus's capabilities spread quickly through business networks across New England. David had learned from his college years that success in the technology industry was as much about reputation and relationships as it was about technical capabilities, and he invested heavily in building the kind of customer service and support infrastructure that would turn clients into advocates. By 2010, just 2 years after its founding, Nexus Systems employed over 60 people, had offices in Boston, New York, and Chicago, and was generating more than $5 million in annual revenue. David had successfully transitioned from a solo entrepreneur working out of his parents' basement to the CEO of a rapidly growing technology company with clients across multiple industries and a reputation for delivering innovative solutions that produced measurable results. But David's ambitions extended far beyond simply building a successful software company. He had been quietly studying the business landscape in his hometown region, particularly the construction and real estate industries that had been dominated by established companies like Morrison Construction for decades. David recognized that these traditional industries were particularly vulnerable to disruption because they had been slow to adopt new technologies and modern business practices. The construction industry, in particular, was still operating much the same way it had for the past 50 years, with manual processes, paper-based project management, and limited use of data analytics to optimize operations. David saw an enormous opportunity to apply the same kind of technological innovation that had made Nexus successful to an industry that was desperately in need of modernization. During this period, David also began making strategic investments in other technology companies, using the profits from Nexus to build a portfolio of emerging businesses that shared his vision of using technology to solve real-world problems. His investment strategy was methodical and informed, focusing on companies with strong technical teams, clear market opportunities, and the potential for significant growth. These investments not only generated additional revenue but also expanded David's network within the technology industry and provided him with insights into emerging trends and opportunities. David's success was beginning to attract attention beyond the business world. Technology magazines featured him as one of the country's most promising young entrepreneurs, business schools invited him to speak about innovation and strategic planning, and industry organizations recognized him with awards for his contributions to advancing business technology. The shy, bullied child who had been told he would never amount to anything was becoming a respected figure in the technology community, known for his intelligence, vision, and ability to identify and capitalize on market opportunities. Perhaps most satisfying for David was the realization that his success was creating opportunities for others as well. Nexus Systems had become known as an excellent place to work, with competitive salaries, comprehensive benefits, and a corporate culture that valued innovation, collaboration, and personal growth. David took particular pride in hiring and mentoring other young entrepreneurs and technologists, many of whom went on to start their own companies or advance to leadership positions in other organizations. During his visits back to Millfield to see his parents, David couldn't help but notice the changes that had taken place in his hometown. Morrison Construction, once the dominant force in the regional building industry, was clearly struggling. Projects were being completed behind schedule and over budget, client complaints were increasing, and the company's reputation was suffering due to poor management and outdated business practices. Trevor Morrison, who had officially joined the family business after his legal troubles, was proving to be as ineffective in the professional world as he had been cruel in the social environment of middle school. David felt no satisfaction in seeing his former tormentors' struggles, but he couldn't help reflecting on the dramatic reversal of their circumstances. While Trevor had inherited a position of authority within an established company, he lacked the skills, knowledge, and work ethic necessary to maintain that position successfully. David, on the other hand, had built his success from the ground up, developing exactly the capabilities that would be necessary to thrive in an increasingly competitive and technologically sophisticated business environment. As David contemplated his next strategic moves, he began to see an opportunity that would bring his journey full circle in ways he had never imagined during those painful years of being bullied and dismissed. The same industries that had provided comfortable livings for families like the Morrisons for generations were ripe for exactly the kind of technological disruption that had become David's specialty. The stage was being set for a confrontation that would prove, once and for all, that success in the modern economy belonged not to those who inherited advantage, but to those who earned it through intelligence, innovation, and an unwavering commitment to excellence. The boy who had been called just a dwarf was about to demonstrate that he had become something his tormentors could never have imagined, a force of change powerful enough to reshape entire industries. By 2012, David Chen had built Nexus Systems into one of the most successful technology companies in the Northeast, with annual revenues exceeding $20 million and a client base that included some of the region's most prestigious businesses. But David's vision extended far beyond simply growing his existing software company. He had been quietly developing a comprehensive strategy to revolutionize the construction industry through technological innovation, and the time had come to put that strategy into action. David's analysis of the construction industry had revealed systemic inefficiencies that were costing companies millions of dollars annually while providing enormous opportunities for the kind of technological disruption that had become his specialty. Traditional construction companies were still relying on paper-based project management, manual scheduling systems, and fragmented communication methods that led to cost overruns, delays, and quality control problems. The industry was ripe for exactly the kind of integrated digital solutions that Nexus had perfected in other sectors. The centerpiece of David's strategy was the development of a comprehensive construction management platform that would integrate project planning, resource allocation, supply chain management, quality control, and financial tracking into a single, user-friendly system. This platform, which David's team had been developing for over 2 years, represented the most sophisticated construction management software ever created, with capabilities that could transform how construction projects were conceived, planned, and executed. But David understood that technology alone wouldn't be sufficient to revolutionize an industry as traditional and relationship-based as construction. He needed established companies with existing client relationships, experienced project managers, and proven track records to serve as platforms for implementing his technological innovations. This realization led him to begin quietly researching acquisition opportunities in the regional construction market. Morrison Construction emerged as the perfect target for David's strategy, though not for reasons that would have been obvious to casual observers. While the company was struggling financially and had a reputation for poor management, it still possessed valuable assets that David could leverage. An established client base, ongoing contracts worth millions of dollars, relationships with suppliers and subcontractors, and most importantly, the licenses and certifications necessary to operate in multiple states across the region. David's research into Morrison Construction's financial situation revealed the extent of the company's problems. Years of poor management, cost overruns on major projects, and Trevor Morrison's incompetent leadership had left the company deeply in debt and struggling to meet its obligations to creditors. The elder Morrison, who had built the company over decades of hard work, was in poor health and desperate to find a solution that would preserve his life's work and provide financial security for his family. The irony of the situation was not lost on David. The same company whose heir had tormented him throughout his school years, dismissing him as someone who would never amount to anything, was now in desperate need of exactly the kind of expertise and resources that David had spent years developing. Trevor Morrison, who had inherited a position of authority based solely on his family name, had proven incapable of adapting to the challenges of running a modern construction business in an increasingly competitive marketplace. David's approach to the potential acquisition was characteristically methodical and strategic. Rather than rushing into negotiations or allowing personal emotions to influence his business decisions, He spent months conducting thorough due diligence, analyzing Morrison Construction's financial records, evaluating their ongoing projects, and assessing the true value of their assets. He also developed a comprehensive restructuring plan that would integrate Morrison's operations with Nexus's technological capabilities while preserving jobs for the company's skilled workers and project managers. When David finally made his offer to purchase Morrison Construction, it came at a moment when the company was facing potential bankruptcy and the elder Morrison was running out of options. The offer was generous enough to provide financial relief for the Morrison family while being structured in a way that would allow David to implement the changes necessary to transform the company into a modern, technology-driven construction firm. The negotiations took place in the same conference room where, years earlier, Trevor Morrison had boasted about his family's wealth and influence while mocking David's appearance and academic achievements. Now the tables were completely reversed, with David sitting across from Trevor and his father as the successful businessman offering to rescue their failing company. The contrast could not have been more stark. David arrived prepared with detailed financial analysis, comprehensive restructuring plans, and a clear vision for the company's future, while Trevor seemed barely able to understand the technical and legal complexities of the transaction. During one particularly memorable moment in the negotiations, Trevor attempted to assert some authority by questioning David's qualifications to run a construction company. "What does someone like you know about construction?" Trevor asked, his tone carrying echoes of the same dismissiveness he had shown years earlier in school. David's response was calm but devastating. "I know how to run a profitable business, how to implement systems that prevent cost overruns, and how to use technology to deliver projects on time and within budget. Based on your company's recent performance, those appear to be skills that would be valuable additions to Morrison Construction." The elder Morrison, despite his health problems and financial desperation, was astute enough to recognize that David represented his company's best hope for survival. He had watched his son's mismanagement drive the business toward bankruptcy, and he understood that David's offer provided not just financial relief but the possibility of preserving the jobs of longtime employees who had become like family to him over the years. The final terms of the acquisition reflected David's sophisticated understanding of both business strategy and human psychology. Rather than simply purchasing Morrison Construction outright, David structured the deal as a merger that would allow the Morrison name to be preserved while giving him complete operational control. Trevor would retain a nominal position within the new organization, but with clearly defined limitations on his authority and direct oversight from David's management team. More importantly, David insisted on maintaining employment for all of Morrison Construction's existing workers while implementing comprehensive training programs that would help them adapt to new technologies and improved business practices. This approach demonstrated David's understanding that successful business transformation required not just financial resources and technological innovation, but also respect for the human elements that made companies truly successful. The announcement of the acquisition sent shockwaves through Millfield's business community. Many residents who remembered David as the quiet, bullied student from their local schools struggled to comprehend how he had achieved such extraordinary success. Local newspapers ran feature stories about the hometown boy who had built a technology empire and was now rescuing one of the area's oldest and most established companies. For David, the acquisition represented far more than just a business opportunity. It was validation of every lesson he had learned about the importance of intelligence, hard work, and strategic thinking in achieving long-term success. The boy who had been told he would never amount to anything had just purchased the company owned by the family of his primary tormentor, not out of revenge or spite, but as part of a comprehensive business strategy based on careful analysis and sound planning. The transformation of Morrison Construction under David's leadership began immediately. New project management software was implemented, financial controls were strengthened, and employee training programs were launched to help workers adapt to modern construction methodologies. David also invested heavily in new equipment and technology that would allow the company to take on more complex projects while maintaining higher quality standards and improved profit margins. Within 6 months of the acquisition, Morrison Construction was operating profitably for the first time in years. Projects were being completed on schedule and within budget, client satisfaction scores had improved dramatically, and the company was attracting new business from customers who had been impressed by the dramatic improvements in quality and reliability. Trevor Morrison found himself in the uncomfortable position of working for the same person he had spent years bullying and humiliating. David, however, treated him with the same professionalism he showed all employees, neither seeking revenge nor allowing personal history to interfere with business operations. This approach demonstrated a level of maturity and emotional intelligence that made it clear why David had achieved such extraordinary success while Trevor had struggled to maintain even the advantages he had inherited. 3 years after acquiring Morrison Construction, David Chen stood before a packed auditorium at the annual New England Business Awards ceremony, preparing to accept the Entrepreneur of the Year award for his remarkable transformation of the regional construction industry. The audience included business leaders, politicians, journalists, and community members from across the region, many of whom had witnessed his journey from bullied student to successful business mogul with a mixture of amazement and respect. The statistics that David's companies had achieved were nothing short of extraordinary. Morrison Construction, renamed Morrison Chen Construction to reflect its new technological focus, had become the largest and most profitable construction company in the region, with annual revenues exceeding $50 million and a client base that included major corporations, government agencies, and prestigious institutional clients. The company's innovative use of technology had reduced project completion times by an average of 25% while maintaining quality standards that exceeded industry norms. But the success extended far beyond just financial metrics. David had created over 300 jobs in the region, provided comprehensive training and advancement opportunities for workers who had previously been limited by outdated practices, and established Morrison Chen Construction as a model for how traditional industries could be transformed through intelligent application of technology and modern business practices. Industry publications regularly featured the company as a case study in successful business transformation, and David was frequently invited to speak at conferences and universities about innovation and strategic planning. The ripple effects of David's success had transformed not just his own companies, but the entire regional business ecosystem. Other construction companies had been forced to modernize their own operations to remain competitive, suppliers had upgraded their technology and service capabilities to meet Morrison Chen's standards, and the region had attracted new businesses and investment opportunities drawn by the reputation for innovation and excellence that David's work had established. Perhaps most satisfying for David was the impact his success had on other young people who faced similar challenges to those he had experienced during his school years. He had established scholarship programs for students with disabilities, mentorship initiatives for young entrepreneurs, and partnerships with local schools to provide advanced technology education. The message he consistently shared with these young people was the same lesson he had learned during his own difficult years, that success comes not from the circumstances you start with, but from how you respond to those circumstances with intelligence, determination, and unwavering commitment to excellence. Trevor Morrison, meanwhile, had experienced his own form of transformation, though one that was far more humbling than David's rise to prominence. Working under David's leadership had forced Trevor to confront the reality of his own limitations and the consequences of years of coasting on inherited privilege rather than developing genuine skills and capabilities. Initially resentful and resistant to David's authority, Trevor had gradually come to understand that his survival in the business world depended on learning from someone who had achieved everything through merit and hard work. The relationship between David and Trevor had evolved from antagonistic to grudgingly respectful to something approaching genuine professional collaboration. David had never mentioned their shared history of bullying and harassment, treating Trevor as he would any other employee who needed guidance and development. This approach had forced Trevor to confront his past behavior without the drama or confrontation that might have satisfied desires for revenge but would have ultimately been counterproductive for everyone involved. During a company meeting celebrating Morrison Chen Construction's third consecutive year of record profits, Trevor did something that surprised everyone who knew their history. He stood up during the open discussion period and publicly acknowledged David's leadership and vision. When David took over this company, Trevor said, his voice carrying a humility that would have been unimaginable during their school years, I thought I knew everything about construction because it was the family business. But I've learned that knowing how things have always been done isn't the same as knowing how to make them better. David has shown all of us what real leadership looks like, and this company's success is a direct result of his vision and expertise. The comment was particularly meaningful because it demonstrated Trevor's recognition that success in the modern business world required exactly the qualities that David had developed during those years when Trevor was dismissing him as insignificant: intellectual curiosity, strategic thinking, adaptability, and the ability to see opportunities where others saw only problems. The roles had been completely reversed, with Trevor now looking to David for guidance and mentorship rather than the other way around. David's response to Trevor's acknowledgement was characteristically gracious and forward-looking. "Success in business is always a team effort," he said, "and our achievements belong to everyone who has contributed to making this company better. We've all learned and grown together, and that's what makes organizations truly successful in the long term." The annual company picnic that summer provided an opportunity for the entire Morrisonshire construction team to celebrate their achievements and reflect on how far they had come. The event was held at the same park where David had often retreated during his middle school years to escape the bullying and harassment he faced at school. Now, instead of hiding from his tormentors, David was the honored guest at a celebration attended by hundreds of employees, their families, and community leaders who had come to recognize his contributions to the region's economic development. As David looked around at the festivities, watching employees and their children enjoying games and activities, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The scared, humiliated child who had been told he was just a dwarf had become a respected business leader whose success had created opportunities and prosperity for hundreds of families. More importantly, he had proven that intelligence, determination, and ethical leadership were far more powerful than inherited advantage or social status. The most meaningful moment of the day came when David was approached by a group of middle school students who had been invited to the picnic as part of a youth mentorship program he had established. One of the students, a young girl who clearly faced her own challenges with bullying and social acceptance, asked him for advice about dealing with people who didn't believe in her potential. "The most important thing to remember," David told her, "is that other people's opinions about what you can or can't achieve don't define your actual capabilities. The people who try to make you feel small are usually the ones who are most threatened by your potential. Focus on developing your skills, pursue your education with passion, and never let anyone convince you that their limitations should become your limitations." As the sun set over the picnic and families began to pack up their belongings, David received a text message that brought a smile to his face. It was from his parents, now in their 70s but still following his career with the same pride and support they had shown during his most difficult years. "Watching the news coverage of your award ceremony," the message read, "Your father and I are so proud of the man you've become and the positive impact you're having on so many lives. The boy who used to dream about changing the world has grown up to actually do it." David's story had come full circle in the most satisfying way possible. He had transformed personal pain into professional purpose, used adversity as motivation for achievement, and built something meaningful that extended far beyond his own success. The companies he had created, the jobs he had provided, the young people he had mentored, and the innovation he had brought to traditional industries represented a legacy that would continue long after any individual awards or recognition had been forgotten. But perhaps the greatest victory was the most personal one. David had proven to himself and to everyone who had witnessed his journey that success in life has nothing to do with physical appearance, inherited advantages, or social status, and everything to do with character, intelligence, and the courage to pursue your vision regardless of what obstacles others might try to place in your path. The boy who had been called just a dwarf had become a man who embodied everything that truly mattered in business and in life: integrity, innovation, leadership, and the wisdom to use success as a platform for lifting others up rather than tearing them down. In the end, that transformation represented the most complete and satisfying form of vindication possible. Not revenge against those who had wronged him, but the creation of something so much better than anything they had ever imagined.